Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL prospect pool from worst to best. Now since my last prospect pool rankings back in July of 2021, a lot has changed with every single team. We've seen a ton of graduations and a ton of prospects getting much better. But who do I see in 2022 as the best and the worst prospect pools in the NHL? And where do I have your favorite NHL team in the prospect pool rankings? Watch till the end for the complete top 32 and all the prospect talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 55% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey and if you like prospects, this channel is the place to be. Now, when I say that a lot has changed compared to that July ranking, I do mean it, because especially when we go farther and farther into today's list, there has been a ton that's changed for my prospect pool rankings. But we're going to start out today at number 32, the last place spot in the entire NHL. Unfortunately, with this team, they've kind of been in this position for really the last 2 years now and don't really show many signs of getting out of it. At number 32, for the worst prospect pool in the entire NHL, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, there's not to say that there isn't highlights on the pool. I still love Samuel Poulin quite a bit. Tristan Braz is a pretty great prospect, as well as Joel Blomqvist in net. But I feel like for the Pittsburgh Penguins, after that, the depth is really lacking, and that's, I think, one of the biggest weaknesses. When you're as good and as consistent as they've been for so long, your prospect pool is going to dwindle, and that's what we're seeing with them at number 32. Now going on to number 31, though, this is a team that is the newest in the NHL, and I thought had a pretty okay draft. Maybe not as good as they could have had, but still the one guy leading the way is really helping them right now. At number 31, I have the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, the big one is Matty Beniers, who I think is one of, if not the best prospect that hasn't been drafted yet in hockey. I think he's going to be an absolute stud for the Seattle Kraken and has been great as well for the University of Michigan again this year in the NCAA. Besides that, they have some strong depth options in the later rounds they got this last draft, but I do feel like when Seattle, with how bad they've done this year, I think their prospect pool will get much better after the 2022 draft. At least here's hoping. Next up, going on to number 30 in the entire NHL, we're going to move on to the New York Islanders, a team that also has some pretty big highlights. Strylights? You know what I mean. Aatu Radu is a huge one who I was a big fan of in the 2021 draft, even though he didn't have the greatest of years, and this year is exploding in the Liga. But they have some other prospects that are in the system that are pretty solid as well. Just, again, not as much depth as you'd like, especially after this last year where Aatu Radu was definitely their highlight pick by far. Still, though, with the Islanders, I don't think they're missing too much, and after this 2022 draft, they'll also likely have some pretty big options. We're going to go on to number 29 next up, though, and this is a team that is kind of interesting to be in this position, considering how much turmoil they've gone through over the past year. I, at number 29, am going to have the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I feel like, personally, the Vancouver Canucks might have the most overrated prospect pool in the NHL. Now, with Vasily Podkolzin graduated, there's really not that much to really cling on to. I like Jack Rathbone a lot. I like Danila Klimovich a decent bit, but besides those two guys, there's really not that much to love. Joni Jurmo is another defensive prospect, but the depth is really lacking, and I feel like for Vancouver, even though they are winning as of late, to be in the position they're in and still have this bad of a prospect pool is pretty sad to see. But now we're going to go on to number 28, considering how good this team has been. It's not a surprise they're in the bottom 5, but they still have some promising young chips in the pool. At number 28, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, in my opinion, there's some pretty big highlights here of Hugo Aniefeld, Tyler Duke, as well as some other players like Taylor Radish, but I do feel like when it comes to Tampa, it's mostly depth. There still isn't a great or even amazing prospect in that pool, which I think is what's keeping it inside the bottom 5, but again, if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, it's not much of a problem when you're winning cups as much as they have. Now going on to number 27, a team that I'm kind of interested to see how they continue with their prospect pool, especially with how mediocre they've been this year. Now at number 27, I have the Boston Bruins, a team that has gotten better prospect pool-wise, I think, quite a bit over the past year and a half. Most of that, I think, is because of Fabian Lysell, a fantastic pick where they got him in the first round of this past draft, but they still have some other guys that I do like quite a bit. Mason Lowry has taken some big steps over the last year and a half. Now, one of the biggest graduations has been Jeremy Swayman. That That's a pretty big loss to the prospect pool. Next up at number 26, we're going to go to a team that, if they didn't have this one player graduated, would probably be much higher and would probably be one of the most underrated pools in the entire NHL. But for now, at number 26, I have the Washington Capitals. Now, if Connor McMichael hadn't jumped into the NHL this year and hadn't been fantastic, then I feel like the Capitals could be up around the 22 range, but they still have some great young prospects in the pool. I like Brett Johnson a lot, Texas-born stud. Obviously, they still have Henrik Lapierre doing fantastic in the system, and I feel like they have some good depth prospects as well on top of it. Nothing amazing, but still a solid prospect pool to build around when you're still competing like Washington is. Now we're going to go on to number 25, and in my opinion, one of the most underrated prospect pools in the entire NHL. Next up at number 25, I have the St. Louis Blues. Now, to me, we saw graduations with Scott Perunovich, which kind of keep it from being a little bit higher, but I still love Joel Hofer a lot. Jake Neighbors has taken some big steps forward. You got other players on that team that I think could have some real good futures as well, like Nikita Alexandrov, who I think could be a pretty solid middle piece in the future too. With St. Louis, there's some good options there, but I don't think there's any stars there that really push it ahead for me. But now we're going to go on to number 24, and this is a pool that I'm hoping is much better after the 2022 draft. Next up at number 24, I have the Arizona Coyotes. Now, you obviously got some standouts like Dylan Guenther, like Victor Soderstrom, but I also like some of the depth options that they have coming up, like Jan Yannick, Matthias Masili, who's extremely underrated, as well as other players like Josh Doan that are looking pretty solid right now. It's not an amazing prospect pool and will be much better after the 2022 draft, but still some solid pieces to work around with the rebuild they're in. Now we're going to go on to number 23, a prospect pool that's kind of in no man's land right now, interestingly enough, especially with how this team is playing. It's a really weird prospect pool, honestly. At number 23, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, there is standouts there. I love me some Lucas Reichel. You guys know Drew Commesso has been really good over the past year as well. On top of that, you got Nolan Allen, who's pretty solid there on the defense. They have some options. They have some decent options there, but I feel like with Chicago being in that kind of no man's land as well, prospect pool-wise, as well as the NHL, it's a little bit of an underwhelming prospect pool in all honesty. And next up at number 22, I'm going to go on to one of the more underrated prospect pools in the NHL, in my opinion, in the Vegas Golden Knights. A team that, even though they traded Peyton Krebs, still has some great options to work with. Most notably, Brendan Brisson is one of those guys, but you also got Zach Dean, who I think is a pretty solid under-the-radar prospect, as well as Daniil Chayka on that defense. You have some pretty good goaltending in Isaiah Seville coming up, and you got some pretty good defensive options in Lucas Cormier on top of Chayka. I think when it comes to Vegas, again, I think their top-end guys are pretty underrated, but again, I don't think the depth is as strong as it maybe could be, even though they are a still pretty recent expansion team. Now going on to number 21, this is where we start to get into the really, really good prospect pools on this list, and next up, I'm going to go at number 21 with the Colorado Avalanche. Now, to still be inside the top 22 when losing Bowen Byram and Alex Newhook to the NHL, that's still pretty impressive, and it shows how solid their drafts have really been over the past couple of years. You got guys like Justin Barron. I love me some Jean-Luc Foudy. He's going to be absolutely fantastic. You got other players in that system that I really love, like Justus Anion, who are going to be pretty big for them in the future. Some overall great depth and great positional depth throughout the system that I think will help Colorado quite a bit, even if they are lacking the stars they had just a year ago. But now going on to number 20, we're going to go to a prospect pool that, although they've had a pretty big graduation as of late, I still think they're one of the more underrated young systems in the NHL, in the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, it really all comes down to their really solid drafting over the past couple of years, and obviously, when it comes to Cole Sillinger, I think he's the main graduate. He's played over 30 games now, and looks to be a main piece of that Blue Jackets team going forward, which is fantastic for an 18-year-old. But you still have Kent Johnson there, which is obviously the main highlight, as well as Kirill Marchenko and Stanislav Svozil and Chinnikov as well, on top of Carson Kuhlman, who they got in this last draft. Really some great overall options, not even talking about Danil Tarasov as well in net. But now, since we're officially inside the top 20, I want to move on to number 19, move on to my favorite team in the NHL. Next up, to the Dallas Stars. In my opinion, still kind of like Columbus, one of the most underrated prospect pools in the NHL, and they haven't really had many casualties over the past year. They still got Thomas Harley, they still got my boy Logan Stankoven, but you have so much other great quality options on top of that too. Artem Martino, I absolutely love. You got Wyatt Johnston, who's looking fantastic in the OHL this year, which is great to see. But you got also guys like Antonio Stranges, who are just so fun to watch. It's just insane. And you have some really good depth, in my opinion, when it comes to the forward group. I really like what Dallas is building in the prospect pool, and they've done it without having many high picks, which I think is pretty impressive. But next up, we're going to go on to the Florida Panthers at number 18, a team that has lost its star player in Anton Lundell, unfortunately, but he's been fantastic in the NHL, so I don't think the Panthers are complaining too much. But outside of Anton Lundell, you still have some great pieces with Mackie Simiskevich, Spencer Knight on that defense. You got Evan Nas, you got as well Kalia Chanok, you got as well some more under the radar forwards like Justin Sordiff and Ty Splananich, who I think are going to be pretty solid for them in the future. Nothing that is as good as Anton Lundell, but some great prospects there that'll be big parts of that future. Next up, we're going to go on to number 17, to a team that has fluctuated a ton in my rankings over the past really couple of years. Next up, though, I'm going to put at number 17, the Edmonton Oilers. Now, when it comes to Edmonton, losing Evan Bouchard is a pretty big loss for the prospect pool, but he's been great in the NHL this year offensively, which is great to see. But you still have some great other prospects like Xavier Bourgault, like Philip Broberg, other players that I like quite a bit in that pool that are pretty under the radar, like Dylan Holloway, who I still don't think gets enough credit that he deserves. But I feel like when it comes to Edmonton, still, it's pretty obvious to say it, but going back to that draft, I'm still shocked they didn't pick Jesper Wallstedt. Now we're going to go on to number 16. This is a team that, in terms of depth, I think is one of the strongest in the entire NHL. And at number 16, I'm going to go on to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, I think the Leafs, if we're talking about underrated prospect pools, are definitely up there. They got so many great young options, it's kind of crazy. Rodion Amirov is obviously a big one on that forward group, but you got other players like Matthew Nice, who I like quite a bit. I could go really all day throughout players that I just love on that Leafs prospect pool, but they've drafted so incredibly well over the past couple of years, it's honestly crazy to think about. Now going on to number 15, we're going to go inside the top 15 officially, and again, we're really starting to get to elite prospect pools here. And at number 15, I'm going to go with the Nashville Predators. Again, another team that I think has a super under-the-radar future in the NHL. Now, the big graduate this year has been Philip Tomasino. That is a pretty big loss, but I still think you got some amazing quality young options. Even though Askarov hasn't had the greatest year this year, I still think he'll be a starter for the future for them. But in terms of the forward group, you got other players like Yuri Afanasayev, who I'm pretty big fans of. You got their great couple of prospects in the first round of this last draft with Zachary Leroux as well as Fyodor Svechkov, who are going to be pretty huge for them. I think the one weakness in this Nashville prospect pool is the defense, who have had some graduates as of recently and haven't had much depth to really replace it. Now we're going to go on to number 14, to a team that, in terms of depth, has some really great options, and a team that always seems to draft very, very solidly. It's acclimated into a top 15 spot, and at number 14, I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, in terms of like the top 5 prospects, they're really solid right now. They obviously got Forrester, they got Emil Andre, they got Cam York, Morgan Frost is still kind of in the mix there as well. You really have some solid quality options, and I feel like with Philadelphia, they've always had some strong depth as well in the prospect pool, and that is the case still today. I feel like they're just one of the most balanced, mixed prospect pools out there, and at number 14, I think that's a pretty valuable spot to have. Now we're going to go on to number 13, and in my opinion, one of the most underrated prospect pools in the NHL today. They got forwards, they got defense, they got goaltending, whatever you want, they got it. At number 13, I have the Calgary Flames. Now, I just said it, whatever you want, they got it. They might not have superstar talent in that prospect pool, but they still got some quality options. My favorite is Dustin Wolf in net, who I saw as an extremely underrated player because he was so small back in the 2019 draft, I believe, but he was a guy that was drafted in the 7th round and has proved everybody wrong, already being the backup to Jacob Markstrom, which is crazy to see. But you got other players like Jacob Pellichet, you got other players that I like a lot too, like Connor Zary, like Matthew Coronato, who they just got in this past draft. Now we're going to go on to number 12, and if we're talking about underrated prospect pools, let's just continue that trend, baby. On to number 12, I'm going to go with the San Jose Sharks, a team that is just so amazing at drafting over the past couple of years. It's honestly insane to think about. I was in love with their 2020 draft, and it's paying big dividends right now. But the pick, I mean, just saying, Emil, just having the pick at number 7 in William Eklund is enough to win be one of the winners of the 2021 draft, and it's panned out that way. He was amazing for them when he played for them in the NHL this year, and he'll be an absolute star for the future. But you got other players that I absolutely love, like Daniil Gushin, like Brandon Coe. Now we're going to go inside, or actually, never mind, we're going to go in the top 11. I was about to say top 10. Not quite. Now, this team is a prospect pool that has kind of been blown up a little bit over the past couple of years. They've had some big graduates, and I feel like when it comes to this prospect pool, they might be not overrated, but I feel like there's not as much as maybe some people expect. At number 11, I'm going to go ahead and pick the New York Rangers. Unfortunately, I don't think the Rangers are a top 10 prospect pool anymore, but it's mostly because of the graduates they've had. This past year, they've had Keandre Miller officially into a big role, Nils Lundqvist as well onto the team, and those are two pretty big graduates on the defensive side of things. They still have some great prospects, and again, being top 11 is fantastic. You still got guys like Braden Schneider, you still got players like Brendan Othman, but now we can officially get inside the top 10 here, and this is again where we start getting to the elites of the elites. Every single prospect pool from here on out is fantastic and deserves to be praised every single day. Now we're going to start out number 10 here, and next up at number 10, inside the top 10, I'm going to go with the Winnipeg Jets. Now to me, the Winnipeg Jets and the New York Rangers are almost tied, but I give the edge to the Jets just because of pure star power. Cole Perfetti, Chaz Lucius, Nikita Chibrikov, there is so much great young forward talent upcoming on that team. It's crazy to think about, and I feel like when it comes to Winnipeg, they have the most underrated prospect pool right now in the NHL, honestly, especially when it comes to their star talent. But then we're going to go on to number 9. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Billy Henila hasn't even graduated, so he's a big part of that future too. Now we're going to go on to number 9, and another Canadian team here inside the top 10. This is a team that in terms of star power might not have as much as they've had in the past, but in terms of depth at almost every position, they have some great young quality players coming up in the Montreal Canadiens. Now, still, I think when it comes to Montreal, they might not be as good prospect-wise as they have been in the past, but the amount of prospects they have is pretty fantastic. I mean, just looking at that forward group, Jan Bishak is a big one for me as well. On top of that, on the defense, you have so many options like Kaiden Guhle, like Jordan Harris if they do end up signing him. You also have, of course, Matthias Norlander, who hasn't fully come into the NHL yet, but will be there eventually. Now we're going to go on to number 8. This is a team that I had in my top 5, I believe, before in July. They have stepped back a little bit, but I do feel like with Anaheim, they still have a lot to offer. At number 8, I have the Anaheim Ducks. Now, having Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras leave are two humongous blows, which just shows how strong Anaheim's prospect pool is that they're still inside the top 10. You obviously got Mason McTavish, Olin Zellweger, Sasha Pazjob from this past draft, 3 back-to-back bangers from them, but you also have other players from past drafts who I think are going to be just key for them, like Lucas Dostal in net, who is one of the most underrated goaltending prospects out there. I really like what Anaheim's building, and again, with every single position, it seems like they have some great depth and some great players coming up. But next up, we're going to go on to number 7, and I'm going to move up to the next pick here and move on to the New Jersey Devils. Now, it really comes up to star power and good depth under the stars as well in the prospect pool. Obviously, you have Luke Hughes on defense and Alexander Holtz, who I think are the two big guys on that prospect pool. Now, we have seen Dawson Mercer graduate. If he didn't graduate, I think this team would be even higher. But at the same time, you have a fantastic elite defensive prospect and a fantastic elite forward prospect. You also have some great other options on top of that, and the depth is really strong, I think, for New Jersey going into the future. And I feel like when it comes to the Devils, although they might not have the best future in the NHL, with how much depth they have coming up in the prospect pool, they're going to be a pretty fun team to watch, and they already are so far this year. Now we're going to go inside the top 6. Next up here to a team that I've kind of gone back and forth on in my rankings a lot throughout making this video, but I feel like for them, they've had some pretty huge graduates over the past couple of years, which kind of brings them down a little bit for me in the Ottawa Senators. Now, I still do consider Shane Pinto a prospect, so that's a big reason why Ottawa is still this high, but you got Shane Pinto, you got Jake Sanderson, who's one of the best defensive prospects in the NHL right now, and you have just a ton of depth. I feel like for Ottawa, they still could have better drafts if I was drafting them, no bias, confirmed, but I feel like when it comes to Ottawa, to the Tyler Boucher pick is an obvious example. Let's say they picked almost anybody but that, but let's say they picked Jesper Wallstedt. I feel like the Sens would be in the top 5 if that was what they were able to do. But now we're going to go inside the top 5 for the official 2022 prospect pool rankings, and next up, we're going to go to a team that did end up picking Jesper Wallstedt, and in my opinion, one of the most underrated prospect pools in the league, once again, in the Minnesota Wild. If you're a Wild fan and you're not excited about this future, I don't know what to tell you, because the Wild have something special right now. Already the NHL team is pretty great for them, but the future is insane. Marco Rossi, Matthew Boldy, you got also on top of that Adam Beckman on the forward group. When it comes to defense, Ryan O'Rourke, Carson Lambos, two big guys there. You also have on the goal, of course, Jesper Wallstedt, who is, in my opinion, the best goaltending prospect right now in the NHL. And you have a future for yourself, which is very promising, very complete, and has pieces, star pieces, on every single position. Now we're going to go on inside to the top four and go on to, in my opinion, the team that's jumped up a lot. Now, one specific trade definitely helps them, but at number 4, I have the Buffalo Sabres. Now, again, the Jack Eichel trade helps them a lot. Peyton Krebs is a huge addition onto that prospect pool, but I feel like a lot of their prospects have had pretty fantastic years. And when it comes to the AHL system, for example, JJ Peterka and Jack Quinn have been stellar together as well throughout that system and have been amazing for the Rochester Americans. But you also got Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who's still, I think, a big guy on that goaltending. And of course, onto the defense, you got Owen Power, who is one of the best prospects in the NHL and the best defensive prospect right now in the NHL as well. But now we're going to go inside the top 3. This is, again, where we get into more elite talent here. And next up at number 3, I'm going to go to a team that has easily the best depth prospect-wise, in the prospect pool-wise, in the entire NHL, and that is the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, the big thing that I want to stress here is that I still consider Seth Jarvis a prospect and not yet graduated. Even though it seems that way, he's only played 22 games, hasn't gotten past the 25 game mark, which is a big threshold for me, so I still consider him in the prospect pool. With that said, there is so much outside of Seth Jarvis. I'm just going to put it on the screen right now. There is just so much talent on forwards, on defense, and goaltending. It is a loaded prospect pool for a team that doesn't even need depth. They're perfectly fine depth-wise in the NHL, but they have drafted so incredibly well, it's honestly insane to see. Now we're going to go on to number 2. We're going to go to the second team here in the prospect pool rankings. This is a team that was second as well in July's rankings, and although they've had a huge loss of graduations on the defense and the forward side of things, they've still held up pretty well because of Stevie Yzerman, baby. At number 2, I have the Detroit Red Wings. Now, here's the thing. They were second in July's rankings, and they've lost Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider due to graduations. And they're still second place. That just tells you how strong the Steve Yzerman effect is in Detroit and how solid that prospect pool is. Obviously, you've seen Simone Edvinsson have a fantastic year in the SHL, but you got Sebastian Cossa, you got great other players like William Wallander on that defense, Jonathan Berggren, who's one of the most underrated forward players out there. You still got Joe Veleno, who I still consider a prospect since he hasn't gotten past the 25-game threshold. You got other great players. I mean, I just feel like when it comes to Detroit, there's so much depth there in all positions. There's so much to like. And even though they've lost 2 pretty big guys, I still consider their future one of the best in the NHL, prospect pool-wise, and I still think they're one of the best right now in the NHL. Now, we are going to move on to the best prospect pool, the number 1 team. And although they've lost a little bit, I think, due to momentum this year, I still think they are the best prospect pool in the NHL and might still have the best future as well in the National Hockey League. Going on to number 1 and the best prospect pool, let's move on once again to the Los Angeles Kings. And although, again, I think they've lost a little bit of momentum, and I still think their number 1 spot isn't exactly guaranteed, especially after the 2022 draft, for instance, I feel like with the LA Kings, their prospect pool is just too good to pass up in all positions. I would say goaltending is a little bit of a weakness, but at the same time, I don't think they really need too much. But I feel like when it comes to LA, their forward group, at least prospect-wise, is the best in the NHL right now, with Quinton Byfield still being there, Alex Turcotte still being there. You got other players that are on the fringe like Arthur Kaliev. You got also Kupari on that forward group. On the defense, Brant Clark is a huge addition, but you also got Brock Faber and Sean Dursey and other stellar defensive prospects too. Again, LA isn't a for sure number 1. There's other teams like Detroit and Carolina that are in the mix for their number 1 spot, but at the same time, LA's top end prospects and depth is just so good and so complete that I feel like they're still the number 1 spot. I don't feel like they'll be number 1 after the 2022 draft, but for right now, they're still number 1 and are still the best prospect pool in the NHL. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let me know what you guys agree and disagree with my rankings. Who do you guys see as the worst and the best prospect pools in the NHL? And where do you guys see your favorite team being on this ranking? Where would you put them? Let me know your thoughts. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there to any people you guys know online that like prospects and like their prospect pools. And make sure you hit this card right here for all my hockey prospect content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.